All right, today I'm going to show you how to build this indicator. This is a pivot finder, support and resistance, breakout, breakdown type indicator, however you want to use it. So basically what it does is it draws these extended trend lines from pivot lows and pivot highs, or swing lows, swing highs. And it does that throughout the chart. And then once the price breaks the line, it actually truncates the line and it stops drawing it. So I'm going to walk you through the concept of the things that we'd like to achieve in this, and then we'll also go through the design process, how we find the different reserved words or functions that we're going to need for it, and then we'll just start building it piece by piece. So let's get started. So you've got the design concept here. We'll go ahead and start looking at the online help to see what kind of functions and reserved words we need. First, let's look at the swing indicator. So we'll just type swing. We have these functions. I'm interested in the swing low function. Doesn't look like we have anything much down here. First, we're going to look at how this function works. We have an instance, a price, a strength, and a length. And it looks like a -1 is returned if there was no swing low. We'll come down here to the instance parameters, and we see instance, price, strength, and length. And here's an example of how to use it. We're going to be looking for the most recent one, which is going to be the first instance of it. Next, I want to look at pivots. So that's a candidate. We have a pivot function. I'm looking for something pivot low, pivot high. So here we have by bar, VS is for variable strength. Pivot high is VS, and we have pivot low VS. So let's look at the low function. We have the same thing here, it looks like. We're also returning a value of -1 if there is no low pivot. We have an instance price. We have a left strength and a right strength and a length. So let me explain what this left and right strength is. So on a swing, the strength is the same both sides of the pivot. So if we use 3, we're going to look 3 bars to the left and 3 bars to the right. So we consider this the left strength and the right strength. When we have variable strength, we can have these be different values. So we can use 6 on this side and 2 on this side, or we can make them 3 and 3, or however we want. We're going to go ahead and use the pivot variable strength. Next, we need to look for text, because we're going to have to draw some text on there. So let's take text. Not seeing much on text here. Text style. Let's go to the next one. Text new. All right, so here we're going to say text, here we're going to use text new. We're going to use a bar date, a bar time, a price, and the text we want. We're going to get back a ID of the text item that was created, and we can use that for modifying how the text looks. One other thing I want to show is how to find this information in the dictionary. So we can come up here and we can type Trendline. We get a whole list of reserved words on how to use trend lines, or things that we can use trend lines with. So here we have TL new, talks a little bit about it. So if we want to see more information, we can click on that and come right over here to the help. This one looks like it uses date, time, and some price. Date, time, and a price. And then the ending bar, date, ending bar, time, and ending price. And then it looks like we're going to get an ID back here. Down here is a couple of other references to how to work with trend lines. Let's do the same for text. So here we have text delete. We have get active, get color, get string, get next. Here's text new. Here's how we create a new one. Again, it looks like we're using the bar, date, time, price. The first thing I'm going to do is try to find the pivot point, because that's going to be key. And the way that we're going to do that is we're just going to try to use the pivot function. So let's go back here and find pivot. Pivot low variable strength. And we'll pull up the help and let that be our guide as we develop this. All right, so now that we've talked about that, let's start with writing some code. And we're going to start with trying to find the pivot line. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to come up here to the dictionary. I'm going to search for pivot. And we're going to do the low side first. And we'll just pull up the help for that. We're going to look for a negative value if there's no pivot line returned. So let's start with if So now we need to declare a couple of input values. I'm going to declare these as vars because later on I will change them to input values. This just allows me to change the variables quick while I'm doing development instead of having to jump back and forth between the chart. Want some valid pivot ranges here. All right, so now that we have that, we don't know if it works. So we're going to start with looking at some text. So I'm going to go to the dictionary, type text, and we're going to create new. So we want this syntax right here. We're going to need to use the ID that was used to create that text. So I'm going to create another var here. I'm going to call it text ID. Now we'll create the text label. Text new. Need date, time, low, and for now we'll use an asterisk. All right, so they're on the chart, but something doesn't look right. So the reason it doesn't look right is these have to be offset back to where the pivot actually occurred. Now we're using a write strength of 3, so we're going to have to offset that by the same amount of the write strength. And the way we do that is use a bracket. Now that will give us the date. And we need to offset the time. Now it's offset, but it doesn't look like it's at the low. We also need to offset the low. Okay, we'll just do a spot check. That looks good. Okay, the next thing we want to do is be able to set this value equal to the low. So that gives me a string expression expected here. So we're going to have to convert this low to a string. So it's num to string. And then the number of decimal places I want is be 2. All right, so let's do a check. 569.95 for the low. 569.68. So something's not right. So we also need to offset this. Let's try it again. 569.68, and our low is 569.68. Let's spot check this one here. 570.44. Low is 570.44. Okay, that looks good. While we're working with text, we want to be able to change the color. So let's go back here, and here's text set color. This is going to be a throwaway value. We're not going to use this anywhere after we set the color. Now we need a color. So this will be I text color. We'll make it light gray. Let's make it yellow. Just verify it works. Okay, that looks good. Light gray it is. Now, we want to be able to show that price. So what we're going to do is we're going to wrap this in. Let's create a variable first, an input. This one's going to be a Boolean, and it's going to be I show price. True. As the default value, true. If I show price, then okay, that works. Okay. Now you see, this would have normally been an input, and I would have had to go here to studies and edit the studies to get that to change. But since I'm in development mode, I can just change it here. This is much faster. All right, next thing we need to do is look at building the trend line. So let's go to the dictionary, type in trend line. We need a new trend line. So let's create a variable for that. Get back a new TLID. So we'll say TLID equals date, time, low, all right, that verified. We don't have a trend line, but that's okay, because what we need is this. We need to offset the trend line as well back to the starting point of the pivot. We're going to offset the date, time, and the low. Well, that's not what we expected, but that's okay. What it's doing is it's drawing from the beginning low, right strength bars ago, to the current low, which is that. That's not what we want. We want the value that's here. So we're going to offset that one too. Okay. Now we have horizontal lines. Next thing we want to do is be able to set the color for this. This is another throwaway value. You need the ID and the color. We'll say I pivot low color magenta. We'll define the high one here too. Make that one cyan. So here we'll use the TLID, and we'll use this. Okay, so it changed. You can change it here. Back to magenta. All right, so that looks good. Now what we need to do is look at extending the trend line until it breaks. So for that, we're going to use a vector. So I'm going to come up here. We're going to define two vectors. Pivot highs and pivot lows. Now I'm going to create a once block to create those, instantiate them. I put these as blank they're actually optional. You can use this. I like to be very specific about my intent. And my intent was that, yes, I did not mean for that to be a constructor. I did not mean to pass any parameters in there. So when we verify this, it says invalid type. So let's go here and we're going to look up vector. We'll go look up vector here. So this is going to involve the EL Systems collection namespace. So let's import that with a using. All right. The next thing we need to do is insert the trendline ID into the vector. And we'll do that. Now, when you insert numeric values into a vector, you should type them because that's a better practice. Now let's come down here and see if we put anything in the vector. Let's see if it's working. I like to test my steps along the way. That way I don't have a bunch of stuff to debug at the end. So we'll say if last bar on chart we'll print pivot lows.count. All right, so it looks like we have 97 pivot lows. The next thing we need to do is start extending those lines up to the breaking point. Now let's think about this. We created the pivot low and then we're looking to extend the line. If we just added it, we don't really need to extend it. So let's not create it and do that check of an additional line. So let's put the extension code up here. This will be our TL low. So what we're going to do is we're going to loop over. I'm going to need a variable. We're going to loop over the trend lines in the vector. We're going to see which ones we need to extend. Now, the reason that I use down to is because we're forcing the pivot low to the front of the vector instead of appending it to the end. We'll get an index out of range error if we do it the other way. So first we need to get some info about the trend line. We're going to cast it when it comes out. Now we're going to use that to go get the price. And that is going to require an ID and a date and a time. We want the current date and time for this. The next thing we need to do is to figure out if we're going to extend the value or if we're going to erase it from the vector so we don't look at it on the next pass. How do we do that for the low? We want to see if the low is greater than or equal to the TL price. If it is, then we're going to set the end value to the current date time. We need the TL ID here, and then we need date, time, and the value. Looks like we need to declare a variable here. Now that's going to be a double. All right, well, it looks like our extensions are working. Now what we need to do is truncate that line. So if the low breaks below the price, then we're going to remove it from the vector and not extend it anymore. And the way we do that is we're just going to erase it from the vector. Okay. That looks good. Let's just scroll back through the chart just to make sure it looks good. We had a lot of trend lines that were truncated. Everything looks good. One last thing we should do is set the style for the text. So here, this will be alignment. So we have horizontal alignment and we have vertical alignment of the text. So we're going to need the text ID. So we want 0, 0. So now that we've done it for the low, let's see if you can do it for the high. So what I want you to do is modify the code. You can stop the video here and see if you can put in the high pivot points for this. Okay. Well, hopefully you got it. Let's go ahead and make the changes to the code for the pivot highs. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to copy this. And I put it here. Now I like to put the highs above the lows because it makes sense to me. That's just how my brain works. So we're going to start changing this to high. We don't want that to be low. We want to change that to high. I'm just going to copy this. The strengths are going to be the same. The show price is going to work the same. That's going to get changed to high. What do we have hiding over here? We have this. It's got to change. That's got to change. Pivot low. We want pivot highs. Well, it looks like we did it, but it looks like the style is not correct. So let's go set the style for this. Let's go back to set style. Make sure we're on the pivot high part. And where do we want this? We want this above the price. So that's going to be the vertical placement. So we'll come down here to vertical. And we want it above the price. So we're going to set that to 1. Then we'll re-verify it. All right, that looks good. So now you've got the bottom ones below and the upper ones above. Oh, look at this. We have cyan and magenta, but they're both magenta. So we need to go find this guy in the high section. It's right there. All right, so the fact that that changed, we don't have to verify that. Next, we need to add the extension for the pivot highs. I'm going to copy this, paste it here. We got that one. Now, this one, we're going to have to flip the sign on it. So it's got to be less than or equal to the TL price. And this one has to be high. Is that all of them? Let's see. It looks like it. All right. Now, let's look at something. Let's look at this one. Now, this line here looks like it's long enough to actually be right there. So let's look at what this value is. 570.10. Let's see what the top of this guy is right here. It's at 570.10. So that line should have extended to the top of this candle. Let's look at this one here. This is 569.70. This one is 569.70. So we have some inconsistency a little bit between these two bars. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to round one of these values. So let's try it on the high because that's the one that's not working. So here, where we're looking to see if it reaches the price, I suspect the high is correct, but I suspect that this one is not. So I'm going to round this one to 2 digits. Okay, so now we got the extension. And this one didn't change, that one didn't change, but the one that was incorrect did change. So we're good on that. So now that we did that round, we should come down here and round the low price so we don't get the same problem. Do we have any close ones? That one I can see a little gap there. I don't see any. We could write code that would actually find it, but I'm not going to do that right now. Okay, I think that's everything. The only thing that we have left to do now is to turn this variable. Okay, now let's play around with some of these values here. So here we have a lot of lines. So let's see how this works. Let's change this to be 6 and 6. All right, so now, according to this, we're looking at 6 on the right, 6 on the left. So that should reduce the number of, let's get into a congested area here. That should reduce the number of pivots that we have. If we set this at 2 and 2, we get a few more lines. Let's try this area here. 4 and 4. See, we lost quite a few pivots. We lost that one and that one. This one here. So this is really helpful when it's not an input, when you're developing it. But once you get the code all done, then we'll just change this var to an input. That's why all these are grouped. And they all start with I. And these don't. These are just regular variables. All right, so that looks good. All right, that looks good. So let's convert this to an input. Now when we go to studies, the inputs show up. So if we make this like 6 and 1, I like this type of setting better because what it does is it shows kind of a long bleed off with a reversal. So it gives me a quick pop on a trend line. Gives me a quick pop on this pivot. But it doesn't give me a whole bunch of pivots. It just gives me the ones that I'm really interested in. The last thing we want to do is make sure that this only updates when the bar closes. So we're going to go up here. Now the bar status is the status of the closing bar, and it's on data stream 1, and 2 is actually the close of the bar. So if we look here, this is the closing tick of the bar. So that's where this 2 comes from. Now I need to indent all of this. At my end. Can remove that. Well, that's it for today. If you liked the video, be sure to like and share. If you have any questions or comments, leave them in the comment section below. Thanks for watching, and I hope to see you in the next video.